Hello there. Today I wanted to break down with you the downward facing dog. This pose is so often used, whether in gym warm-ups or whether in yoga classes. This pose is so useful because you get to work on your shoulder mobility, your thoracic spine mobility, but at the same time, you're going to be stretching your hamstrings, your calves. You will be working actually your ankle mobility and all that in that one pose. There's really so much happening at the same time, which is what actually makes the pose also quite challenging if you really want to focus on all those details. So today I wanted to break down with you everything about the downward facing dog. First, let's look into positioning of your hands and your feet. Sometimes I have seen people positioning their feet a little bit too far from their hands. And sometimes I have seen also people kind of having the tendency to bring their hands and feet together in their attempts to make the downward facing dog a little bit easier on them. Probably. So let's have a look at all these. When your hands and your feet are a little bit too far out, you're somewhere basically in between your down dog and your plank, but kind of halfway. Your shoulders don't extend fully. You actually don't have the space, the chance to fully work your shoulder and your thoracic spine mobility. And also like your legs, like in this angle, there's never ever going to happen that your heels would actually touch the floor no matter what you do. So this is like one of those don'ts that you don't want to do. Another one that I have seen as well is the opposite, when actually people bring their hands and their feet a little bit too close together, maybe in the attempt to bring the heels down to the floor, but whichever way, again, if you see the angle of my shoulders, it's like I am not fully extending and I'm not working my back. I'm not flattening my back. My upper back is a little bit rounded in here. So this is also like the other extreme that you don't want to do. So how do you position your feet and your hand in a way to get that nice triangle shape? The best place to start is actually your tabletop. You want to bring your hands underneath your shoulders, knees underneath your hips. And from there, you would tuck your toes under wherever your feet and your toes land. And then you press the floor away, you send your hips back, and you start straightening your legs until you can. And this is really kind of like the best place to start for your down dog so that you can start aiming for roughly 90-degree angle in your hip and where you can actually be squeezing your shoulder blades together, extending your shoulders, and lifting your hips high, stretching your hamstrings, and kicking the heels down towards the floor. So this is roughly the best positioning where you want to be starting from. Tabletop, that's your indicator where to put your hands, where to put your feet. Then I've also seen people struggling with their back rounded. And the back would round for two different reasons. One would be indeed a difficult mobility in their shoulder or their thoracic spine, or difficult mobility in their hips or tight hamstrings. Ultimately, the result is this. They would really, really want to try to straighten their legs, so they straighten their legs, but then they end up with more weight on their arms, and you see my upper back is round and my shoulders are not extended. I'm not flat in my back. The back is round. So this is the most common difficulty that I have seen people have and people struggle with. So what can you actually do about this? If you know that your shoulders or your back is stiff, or that like, you know, your legs are tight, what do? You bend your knees. whatever happens, if your back is rounding in your down dog, don't worry about your legs that, having to be extended. Absolutely not. Bend your knees. And then suddenly you will see that also in your hips and in your shoulders, you're going to have the space to start straightening your back and extending your shoulders, your arms, and bring the biceps next to your ears. So even if your heels are off the floor, even if your knees are bent, don't worry about that, because the priority for you is first, what you want to focus on is your back, is your shoulders. This is how you get your back straight, bending your knees. Try that and see for yourself. And now let's look into all the little tiny details that you can help yourself in the down dog. First, your hands. You do want to be really spreading your fingers wide. If your hands are like this, you are giving yourself less space as a base to support yourself on. The moment you spread your fingers wide, you have actually bigger space that you have support on. Then you want to be pressing the fingers into the floor, and you want to be pressing also the knuckles underneath the fingers into the floor. And let me show you why. So when you're in your down dog and you don't press your fingers into the floor, you very likely are going to be digging the heels of your wrists into the floor. And that means that over time, you're going to get tired and your wrists are going to be really uncomfortable. And that's not great. So spread your fingers wide, press the fingers into the floor and the knuckles underneath the fingers. And as you try that, you might feel less pressure on your wrists. So this is how you can really set yourself up for success in your hands. All the 10 fingers pressed into the floor, the knuckles underneath the fingers pressed into the floor, and your wrists should feel a little bit lighter. Then you do want to be pressing your hands down and forward as if to the front of the mat, so that your biceps pass next to your ears. And from there, you want to be squeezing the shoulder blades together. This is how you really get to work on your shoulder mobility and your thoracic spine mobility. This is how you can help yourself to really work to flatten your back. So hands down and forward, biceps next to your ears, and then you work further up towards your shoulder blades, squeezing the shoulder blades together. And you will already feel your chest will start opening, your armpits will start opening towards your legs. So that will be your hands, that will be your arms, that will be your shoulders. Now, what about the rest? Your hips, your legs, your ankles. You do want to be working with your hips. You want to be pointing your sit bones high up towards the ceiling. So when you're seated, it's this movement. It's a little bit of a tilt in your pelvis. With this action in your hips, even with your knees bent, you will be actually stretching your hamstrings. Let me show you. So hands underneath your shoulders, knees underneath your hips. From there, you bring your feet, toes onto the floor. You press all 10 fingers and the knuckles underneath the fingers into the floor, and then you press the floor down and forward, and you squeeze your shoulder blades together. And now you see, my heels are still off the floor, my knees are bent, and if I start lifting my sit bones high up towards the ceiling, oh damn, I'm starting to feel my hamstrings. Okay, so this is something that you really do want to work on, hips up towards the ceiling. And then your knees, they can stay bent. Over time, gradually, as you will be getting better in terms of your flexibility, maybe you will start extending and extending and extending further. But don't think that like you have to extend your knees in the down dog. It's perfectly fine to keep doing your down dog with your knees bent as long as you feel the challenge in your hamstrings and in your calves, and and your back is nice and straight. So don't worry too much about your knees, but yes, of course, straightening your knees more is going to give you more stretch. But what about your ankles? What about your heels? Let's go back there again. So you're in your down dog, your knees might be bent, you're lifting the hips high, and you're intensifying with that stretch in your hamstring. Now, what about your calves? You want to be kicking your heels down towards the floor, and you want to be therefore flexing your ankles. You want to be really bringing those heels down towards the floor and working on your ankle mobility in flexion. So this is where you kind of start bringing in not just your hamstrings with your hips, but also your calves by dropping the heels lower down towards the floor. And if you actually got yourself to a place where your hips are high, your knees are straight, and your heels are digging into the floor, and you still want more sensation, you still want to go deeper in the pose, start lifting the toes off the floor. And I swear, you're going to feel your legs firing up. So, these would be the tips and the details of your down dog. First, what I really want you to remember is bend your knees as much as you need. Really prioritize your back, prioritize the work on your shoulders and your shoulder mobility and your thoracic spine. The knees, the legs, that's all going to come after. And then use your hands, use your fingers. You don't want to put too much pressure on your wrists. You don't want to put more pressure on your wrists than necessary. And then, challenge yourself with the positioning of your hips and the positioning of your heels. Enjoy your downward facing dog. See you in the next one.